Patrick Beverley was on track to be an all-time remembered Sixers legend, and then things took a sour turn for more reasons than one. So we know Pat Bev for his expressive personality, the way that he talks his talk and backs it up on the court for what little extent that he does bring, and it has now turned south now that it's happening in a Milwaukee Bucks uniform. But I do think things took a low turn last night as the Sixers fell to the Milwaukee Bucks, and Pat Bev rubbed it in his old team a little bit. So I want to start off pulling up this clip here. As the game is decided, Patrick Beverley is the guy who ends up with the ball with the clock winding down, dribbles it all the way the length of the court to dribble it out right in front of the Sixers bench, and then flips it right in the direction of head coach Nick Nurse. So I'm going to pull up that video here and then go into things from there.
Knock off the Sixers, 114 to
So besides the fact that that was Mo Bamba's best defensive play of the entire game, and I do like that Mo has Nurse's back, it is something that rubbed me a little bit the wrong way with Pat Bev. And I have been a pro Pat Bev guy, that I liked what he brought to this team. I do think he's a guy that I was excited for the Sixers team to go into battle with come playoff time, and I do think that he is a player that brings more than the box score indicates, but it is still a little swinging above your weight class when we talk about things like this. For starters, it is not Nick Nurse's fault that Pat Bev is no longer on this team. That was a Daryl Morey decision, and that was handled pretty publicly from the standpoint of Pat Bev basically accusing him of lying, saying that James Harden is not wrong, and even to the point where Pat Bev taking to his podcast, taking the behind the scenes, showing him during the process of getting traded, figuring out his next steps, all these things. I will say that was pretty cool from a content standpoint to get an inside look at that process of things, but it still portrayed the Sixers in pretty negative light, and I do think that's something that wears on the organization. So I want to give one more look at this exact clip, and you can see it does feel like there's a little tension between Nick Nurse and Pat Bev. I give Nurse a little credit for basically ignoring the situation, even though I think he was quite aware. And then again, shout out to Mo Bamba for stepping up and defending his coach.
knock off the Sixers, 114 to
So I know it's not just that. There is a long-standing history with Pat Bev, and he did still stick to his classic after the game, running back to the locker room and getting a tweet off saying, "Sorry it took so long, had to lift. Philly always loved, but belt to ass at Pat Bev Pod." So that is the way that he goes about every single victory. It was pretty, I enjoyed it during the process when he was with the Sixers. And again, he did have some high moments with the Sixers team, tying his career high in points, having moments where he was asked to step up and be a primary creator in the offense while the times the Sixers were shorthanded, and he delivered in most of those opportunities. That I do think the overall impact of Pat Bev on the Sixers organization is still positive, and I don't want to clown the guy because of that exact fact there. That is the most important thing, is what you brought on the court, and he did, but it still does rub me the wrong way. And I will say, I love this quote from Giannis. He kind of hit the nail on the head when talking about Pat Bev here, and he says, quote, "He's one of those guys that, sorry for my language, that you say he's an a-hole, but when he's playing on your team, it's like, quote, that's my a-hole, you know?" And I love him. And that is the Pat Bev experience exactly. That when he's on your team, you love all these antics, all the personality. He's like a WWE character mixed into an NBA player's body. That's so much of the hype up, the talk, and I do think that reflects on both the on-court standpoint and the podcast. That Pat Bev is one of these rare athletes that has his feet dipped in both ponds, that he is a way where he is an active athlete going about things that the NBA has not really seen. Yes, there's guys like Paul George. I know Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart jumping on theirs at this point, but it feels like Pat Bev takes it to an extreme just on the immediate reactions. Him hopping on the mic directly after games, being able to do his own post-game slants, control the narrative, be the new media that everyone talks so much about in a way that he's cut way more from the Draymond mold for both really all of this, the on-court antics and being so involved in the media space, than any of these guys that tend to casually have a podcast, which is more the norm for the active players. But with Pat Bev, he did have some comments on that specific podcast that rubbed the Sixers the wrong way, even at the time. So as I mentioned, that he did basically publicly call Daryl Morey a liar at that point. And he also had an interesting quote in the next podcast that I specifically want to talk on here. So Pat Bev says, quote, Tobias is on the phone. He's like, "Yo, what's the biggest difference between Philadelphia and Milwaukee?" I'm like, everybody in Milwaukee wants to win. Everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to win. It's not about stats. It's not about numbers here. It's not about who gets the ball. Everybody here wants to win. So for starters, Pat Bev tried to walk this back on the following week, basically throwing this back on the front office, saying they weren't committed to winning, that moving on from him was evidence that they are not as focused on winning as another organization. I also think Pat is just kind of changing the subject and trying to twist his words a little bit here, that I don't think you can read this quote and seriously think that he is speaking about the front office here. This to me is an on-court basketball conversation that he wants to have. And my take with that is, if you got something to say like that, say it with your chest and back it up. If it's not, then don't try and twist it in the way that I think you meant it. And I do believe that, again, you want to read through these lines, and I'll read it one more time, saying, I'm like, everybody in Milwaukee wants to win. Everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to win. It's not about stats. It's not about numbers here. It's not about who gets the ball. Everybody here wants to win. So if that's the biggest difference between Milwaukee and Philadelphia, then what is the problem in Philadelphia? Who is that you're referring to? If you want to be Mr. Outspoken, call people, say it the way you mean it, who are you talking about there? Is it Joel Embiid? Is it the star of the team that you have an issue with too much stats? I know the focus on the 30-10 streak, him leading the league in scoring, these factors, but you know why that is the case? It's because he's a damn good basketball player and far better than Pat Bev can be, and far better than really anyone else in the league when he is playing his game. So I didn't love that from Pat Bev of basically walking him back and trying to change what he directly stated when there's words and there's quotes as evidence, my friend, that it is all put on film. We know what you said. We know what you meant. And even walking it back didn't rub me the right way. And even when we talk about what Pat Bev does bring to this team, again, I've mentioned I've been a pro Pat Bev guy, that I liked what he brought to the Sixers team during the time, but I'm not going to act like trading him is the end of the world. The production they've gotten from Kyle Lowry since the point of him reaching this team on a buyout agreement has been far above what we got from Pat Bev during the extended period of time with him on this team. That there's no doubt that Kyle Lowry, even at this point in his career where he's not the player he once was, and it's very clear he's on the downswing, there's more juice in his legs from an offensive standpoint. He still brings the frustrating factors. He's already taken more charges in a Sixers uniform than Pat Bev ever did. I know that's not the tell-all statistic, but that still speaks to the defensive annoyance that is one of the strengths of Pat Bev. And if I want to pull up the box score from last night in that loss to the Milwaukee Bucks, Pat Bev, in his 26 minutes of play, with just 6 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, a steal, a block, a turnover, shot 2 of 5 from the field, knocking down 2 of his 3 3-point attempts. It was a fine Pat Bev game, but that is what it is. You know what you're getting to an extent, that he will make some plays, he will have some winning moments, winning flashes, but he's not going to be a guy that overall helps the ceiling of your team. And specifically on the trade to the Milwaukee Bucks, again, that being Pat Bev in exchange for Campaign and a second-round pick, I would argue that Campaign impacted the game last night far more than Patrick Beverley did. That Campaign in his 13 minutes of play, adding 11 points, coming in, hitting 3 straight three-pointers, and an impressive off-the-glass finish around the rim for that 11th point there. Campaign was a guy that clearly had revenge in his eyes as well, that I think he feels the same thing. And shout out to Campaign, man. He doesn't get talked about a lot, and he is a guy that, frankly, when I think the rotations get narrowed down come playoff time, he will be on the outside looking in, but he is a guy that does have more of an offensive motor, that can do more in an extended period than Pat Bev can, that he's a guy that elevates his game in a way that when the team needs it is capable of delivering in a way that Pat Bev, while he's shown flashes of, I don't think can reliably do. And for a moment like last night, that was a change the game moment from Cameron Payne, that when he stepped in that game, he put the Sixers in a cleaner position to get the victory than was the case before, that he felt that offensive motor, you felt the change in energy, and that is what a spark off the bench is supposed to bring. But the reality is still the reality, that Pat Bev is on a more serious contender at this point in time, that everything on the Sixers roster is still fully dependent on whatever is up with Joel Embiid's knee and what the status of him is returning. And by the way, the chances of a Milwaukee Bucks and Philadelphia 76ers first round matchup is pretty likely, and there'd be a great deal of revenge on everyone's mind there. So to take a look at these standings here, once again, the Boston Celtics still running away with the Eastern Conference with their 52-14 record, leading the way there. But the Milwaukee Bucks, after last night's victory, climbed into second place with their 43-24 record. The Cavs sitting in third, the Knicks down in fourth, the Magic in fifth, the Pacers have climbed up to the 6th seed there, and then their other Sixers down in that 7th seed with their 36-30 record, 16 games out of first place. Again, this is going to be a tight race in the middle here, that when you look at those seeds 4 through 8, now separated by 3.5 games, so a little bit more separation there. But even the Sixers, 16 games back of first place, but just 2 from 5th place, just 3 from 4th place. And if you look a little below, the Heat just a half game behind them in that 8th seed, a little bit of a gap from the Bulls in 9th seed, but there's going to be a lot of turnover within this gap here. But for the Sixers specifically, it's tough to feel great about their odds of getting another victory throughout the next stretch. They have a tough schedule and still eyeing, and with no concrete date of when Joel Embiid's expected return will occur. Did drop a video speaking a little bit about what we know from the medical standpoint of his knee, the statuses and quotes that we've received at this point. But the bottom line is the Sixers continue to keep things close to the vest, being very cryptic about this. So for the Sixers, the goal is really to just have a healthy team come playoff time. That the rest of this stretch for the regular season essentially does not matter as much as one would expect. But when looking at these standings, with these Sixers currently in 7th place, that means they are destined for a play-in tournament matchup. And if they were, let's say, get this play-in tournament matchup, Say they win first round and secure that 7th seed, that means they're facing this Milwaukee Bucks team in a 7-game series. And I'm not going to say that I feel awesome about it. The Bucks are a tough team, but they're definitely beatable. That Joel Embiid, if he returns and plays to his full form, will have a great deal to say about who wins that series. That in a head-to-head matchup, I feel pretty good about Joel Embiid being a better player on the floor than Giannis, and I will stand by that, especially if we get some sort of equal whistle, because last night was brutal with the Tyrese Maxey shooting just 3 free throws compared to Giannis's 18, while Giannis offensive fouls and travels his way down the court on every play versus Tyrese Maxey getting assaulted on his path to the rim and still finding ways to finish about it. Thought Tyrese had a really impressive performance and continues to develop and flourish into that true second-tier option, but it takes Joel Embiid being the center focus. And with Pat Bev specifically, he is a guy that will be straight up intolerable in a 7-game series. And again, that is what makes Pat Bev Pat Bev. So for now, I will enjoy him keeping his mouth shut on the podcast. I do not need to hear a great deal of comment and in just his thoughts on how this went down. The bottom line is the Sixers are in a better spot right now than they were a couple weeks ago. Still adding some prospects, still adding some players, and waiting for the return of Joel Embiid. And don't count out this team from a playoff standpoint, because everything changes, and those tweets might not age quite well if Joel Embiid is back on the floor. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. How sick are you of the Pat Bev experience? Because I'm surprised how sour it's turned from my personal standpoint, that this was a guy that I like quite a bit, and that is kind of evaporating pretty rapidly. So let me know if you're on the same page as me. Drop that in the comments. Drop a like on the video, and make sure you're subscribing right here on Sixers Digest. Talk to you next time. Peace.